Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Way We Grow podcast, a production of the Craft Growers Network. I'm your host, Nick Wolfe. Today, our guest is Zac Ricciardi. He works for BioSafe, and he is a grower and advocate for cleanly grown cannabis. He has a career that spans a bunch of different aspects of the cannabis industry, both in production as well as cannabis adjacent businesses. And so let's welcome to the show, Zac. Zac, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Nick. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and kind of give my story, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. You came highly recommended from our mutual friend Jared, who we've had on the show recently, and he said that you were the guy to talk to about kind of cleanliness and cleanliness protocols in cannabis. Of course, you work for BioSafe. BioSafe is an amazing company. I use their products all the time. Zerotol probably being like that one go-to that if you don't have zerotol in your garden nowadays, it almost feels like that's going to be the first thing I point out and say, you need to go get zerotol. um, but yeah, let's talk though about a little bit about your journey into where you are now. But let's go all the way back. What were some of the first experiences that you had with plants? Did you start with cannabis, or did you start maybe in mom and dad's garden growing up? But yeah, take us all the way back and talk to us about your first experiences with plants.
So, little Zach, way back in the day, used to help my grandfather, my Sicilian grandfather, Eugene, in his backyard. He would grow tomatoes and, peppers and things of the like. And he always stressed to me the importance of taking care of the soil and that, if whatever you put into the plants, you're going to get back. And so it was instilled in me at a very young age that proactive versus reactive approach when it comes to gardening, and knowing that if you don't give the garden the attention it deserves, the harvest you're going to get is going to reflect that. I
For sure.
was very lucky to, have that style upbringing because I know there's a lot of folks that aren't necessarily exposed to gardening at such a young age, but, having that appreciation for nature instilled in me really helped me grow into the guy that I am today.
Nice. So yeah, I mean, I can you know that's a very similar experience to what I had is growing up with grandma showing me all of the things in her garden and kind of pointing me in a direction of, hey, go do this or that in the garden, getting my hands dirty, so to speak. And I think that it's just one of those great ways to kind of also like, I feel like there's like a grandparent grandchild bonding thing in the garden that is like that's a tale as old as time, and so that's pretty awesome. What were some of the like most memorable experiences you had in the garden? Were there any like specific fruits or vegetables or anything like that that you remember? I mean, it sounds like proactivity rather than reactivity was something that you were kind of steered towards. What what was like the method that you saw that kind of steered you in that direction?
He would, just take me out there and show me how to prune sucker branches. He would show me which tomatoes, weren't necessarily the biggest ones on the cluster, so he would always pick those so the other
Okay.
ones would fruit better. And, I can remember making sauce. Like, that's the thing that sticks out to me more than anything. The gardening part of it, like, there are bits and pieces, but I can remember taking tomatoes and raking them over the, little stainless steel thing to make sauce on Sundays for the family. And that was probably the most memorable part of all of it because it showed that, like, you cook with love, so to speak, and if you can cook with love with ingredients that also have love, it just makes that whole experience that much more special.
Nice. Now, as a huge fan of The Sopranos, did you call it gravy or sauce?
So it's gravy if it has meat in it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Good point. I did not know that,
yeah,
but thank you for the clarification.
of course.
I mean, that's awesome though, because I do also remember my dad was a chef growing up, and so part of the experience of the garden was that we got, there was all this weeding and stuff that I didn't like to do, but then my dad would make something delicious with the stuff from the garden, and so it was always worth it in my mind, and I never really lost that either. But yeah, that just sounds like such a, it's almost like when the tomatoes are in, you're just like, all right, it's sauce time, and we're making sauce every Sunday. the tradition of that and sort of the repetition, I can see that being a very like formative experience to be like pushed into the garden almost deeper than someone might otherwise.
And it really translates over into cannabis because it showed that if you put in the hard work, the harvest is worth it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So, growing up, gardening with grandpa, um, when did you first experience cannabis? Was it as a plant or was it as a consumer?
It was as a consumer. I started smoking weed at a very young age. I really didn't get into it until like my freshman year of high school, but I smoked it in middle school once just because I didn't, want to be the odd man out, so to speak. I was
Sure.
fishing with some family and I was like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, smoking weed. You want to try? And I was like, sure. I didn't know any better, but it was around freshman year of high school that I really started getting into it, and I noticed how it would actually help me in my day-to-day life. I feel like cannabis definitely is a medicine and can help people, reach their full potential. Quite to the contrary of what we were told as kids growing up, that it would make you lazy and stupid. I owe everything in my life to cannabis. It has allowed me to excel in many fields and be able to touch many more lives than I ever would have been able to otherwise.
For sure. I feel like without a satisfied endocannabinoid system, there's just something missing from like the human experience almost. And, I remember listening to it somewhere on some show that, when before hemp was heavily removed as a crop in the United States, that there would be a lot of hemp chaff and sort of the excess of the hemp producing process that would be fed to cattle and stuff. And the cattle would then have all of these cannabinoids within their sort of fatty tissue that would then translate into their milk. And so for a long time, the human endocannabinoid system was getting satisfied through the consumption of dairy products. But that went away, and then we had this almost like an imbalance in the endocannabinoid system. And now that it's kind of being, I mean, it's not really being rejuvenated, so to speak, but there is a lot more legality to it now and less repercussions that people would have to face for the use or growing or, anything cannabis related. So who knows? Maybe, hopefully, there's a lot more research that comes out in terms of how cannabis actually like plays within each unique endocannabinoid system and how we can help target certain things that are affected by it. But
The fact that we even
I
have an
agree.
ECS tells you that, it's a plant that should be probably utilized in some respect in our day-to-day lives, whether it's, supplementation, like you said, through food or, for some people smoking it, eating it, whatever. It definitely, you wouldn't have that system if you weren't supposed to use it. Like we evolved that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like almost how I feel like there's other parts of our body too that were for so long thought to not really do anything, but now with newer technologies and a better understanding of them, like I think what's like the gallbladder or the appendix or one of those ones that's like not really necessary or thought to not be necessary is now being seen as being something where it's like, no, that's like your storage for good gut microbes and stuff like that, so that your body can replenish itself after it perhaps is fighting some battle with another microorganism in your body.
I
And
read that as
so,
well. The gallbladder is like a library for microbes, so to speak. Like
yeah,
that's all the genetic sequencing of any DNA that you come across. That's where the library is, so to speak.
I
So
mean
yeah,
that's so cool. That's so cool. I to think that the body has that is just like, yeah, come on. It, if the endocannabinoid system is there, then it's got to be used for something. So let's
yeah.
just, we don't have to know necessarily what it is yet. We just have to keep pushing towards that striving for that knowledge. Um, so, being a user and having found like sort of the medicinal benefits of the plant, when did you first like realize that it was a plant that could be grown? Did you make that tie early on? I know for myself, I missed the fact that it was a plant that could be grown for the first few years, and then it clicked like, oh my God, this can grow. Um,
I grew it when I was younger in high school. I wasn't very good at it, but unfortunately, the cannabis that I had access to back in the early 2000s, the majority of it had seeds. And so, a lot of times when you were breaking down a bag to smoke in a blunt or a joint or whatever, you just throw the seeds in the ground. And one day we were like, hey, those are actually viable seeds. So, we tried our hand at growing stuff with painter's lights and outside, but it was nothing like what today's cannabis growing techniques are. It was, just backyard. Hopefully my mom doesn't see it type stuff.
Yeah, I've been there. Um, so when did you then sort of first see, like, did you experience success on your own first, or did you see cannabis being grown successfully first that then kind of inspired you to grow your cannabis successfully?
So I was pretty lucky in terms of some of the folks that I was able to come across in Santa Cruz and work with. There was a gentleman named John that taught me a lot about growing, and he really showed me that it was something beyond just a way to make some money. Like he showed me that it is, truly an amazing plant, and that it doesn't necessarily need all the stuff that people do to it. Like I almost feel like he was the one that really instilled that KISS method for me, that keep it simple, stupid. He didn't have any high pressure sodium lights at his grow. They were all metal halide and T5s. And he would veg in his house, and then everything would go outside into the greenhouse, into these tree pits, and he would throw rotten bananas and fish guts and rusty nails and all kinds of stuff in the pits before he would plant on them. But then he would just use water, and it showed me that, bottled nutrients are cool, and it definitely allows you to have a precise dose of whatever elements you're trying to feed, but that Mother Nature definitely knows what she's doing. And so I was able to really kind of see the organic side of cannabis. And in Santa Cruz, I had my day job, but everybody there was also kind of doing the SB 420 Prop 215 side hustle thing. And I was able to learn indoor cultivation as well. And got on kind of with the Gardening Unlimited crew, the Santa Cruz hydroponics and organics guys. Lived in Santa Cruz for many years. When I decided to relocate back to Colorado because of the industry taking a big boom here, the Gardening Unlimited guys wanted to open a store in Colorado, and so I was able to help them kind of launch that flagship location. Worked there for a
Cool.
couple of years, and then was picked up by a place called American Clay Works and Supply. They're Colorado's oldest wholesale grower supply. They were founded back in 1893, and
Wow.
they had quite the extensive portfolio of customers. I really was able to kind of hone my commercial skills working at ACW because I would talk to a potato grower, a begonia grower, and a weed grower all in the same hour, and they'd all have a similar issue. So I was kind of able to emirate all the knowledge that these guys were doing and say, hey, this approach seems to work across all three fields. It's safe in terms of end user exposure. It's something that might be applicable to cannabis, and it really allowed me to kind of put a blueprint together for a lot of the commercial facilities to be able to attack issues that might arise in an ethical way so that they are able to harvest a clean, potent crop, but not have to worry about, residuals from some of the conventional pesticides that, were used for many years before regulations were put into place.
For sure. What were some of those sort of crossover events that you were seeing happen across different crops, including cannabis? I feel like that'd be really interesting for the listeners to hear about.
There was a lot of issues with just conventional things that indoor growers face. Powdery mildew is a big one. Spider mites, thrips. A big one for a while was hemp russet mite because they're pretty voracious, and a lot of conventional chemistries really don't work on them. But just trying what we could, we found out that azadirachtin and sulfur in combination work very, very well, and so there are tools out there to definitely get rid of stuff. And now there are growers outside of cannabis that will use sulfur to treat for that pest, and that was something that was discovered in realm that is now applicable outside of cannabis as well. So
For
um,
sure.
it was just a lot of common issues that regional greenhouse growers would share. A lot of the pests, they don't care if they're eating potato stock or cannabis plants, they just want food.
For sure. Well, and just to clarify, since you are the IPM guy, I gotta ask, when you say that you're using azadirachtin and sulfur to treat hemp russet mites, what's your interval between those sprays? I'm assuming you're not mixing them unless you
Yes.
are, because I've always known like oils and sulfurs are a big no-no. But
Typically, you want
yeah,
to wait about 14 days in between any oil application and a sulfur application. But the Azagard that is actually produced by BioSafe, we have a proprietary extraction process that doesn't use any ethanol or petroleum in said extraction process. And our inert ingredients are saponin, which is a yucca derivative. It basically allows things to, how do I put it? It makes water wetter. Basically, it just
yeah,
gives you better adhesion when you use it as a spray. And then a sorbate, which is like a stabilizer that they use in ice cream. Because of Azagard's formulation, it is compatible with sulfur, whereas most
really,
oils are not. So this is not a universal, like, use whatever azadirachtin brand you want and then go after this pest. Azagard specifically, because of our inert package, is compatible with sulfur. What I have growers do is basically an azadirachtin spray on a Monday, a sulfur application on a Friday. I'm partial to disperse, but there are a few different wettable sulfurs out there on the market. The key ingredient is sulfur, so pick your brand, so to speak. But if you
hmm
do azadirachtin on Monday, it's going to do some really key things for you. First and foremost, it's an anti-feedant, so if we can take away the insect's food source, we make them a lot easier to kill. It's a growth regulant, so if they're not able to get to those mature phases, they're not reproducing. So we're dealing with less of an infestation exponentially as we move forward. And it's an ovicide. So when it comes in contact with those adult females that are already in the population, it effectively renders them sterile. So any eggs they lay aren't going to hatch. And again, that affects that upcoming population so that we are diminishing their ability to reproduce. We're taking away that food source. They can't grow right. And so I kind of look at it like azadirachtin is the jab and the 1-2 combo. We wait, that interval on Friday. We apply our sulfur and basically, repeat that process 3 times. The life cycle of a russet mite is give or take about 21 days. So as long as we do those 3 subsequent applications, there's a 99% chance, as long as you're getting complete coverage, that you will have eliminated your issue.
awesome. Well, that's a great explanation, and I had no idea that you could use that with it. So I really appreciate you sharing that information. And you described the modes of action that the Azagard has, but I've never really known. I always just think, kill them with sulfur, whether it be a mold or a mite, especially like russet mites or broad mites. But what's the actual mode of action that the sulfur is taking to destroy those populations? Because it is so effective as a knockdown.
Because of sulfur being a caustic chemical, it basically slowly just burns them up. It's
So it does burn them alive.
it's a long, painful death.
Oh my God.
That's why when we do a sulfur application, we don't want to spray anything within a couple of days. We want that residual sulfur to be on that leaf tissue because as they crawl across it, they're continually exposed to it. The stuff that actually adheres to their carapace is a constant irritant, and it is a very effective tool. It's not the most humane way to do it, but you know what? I like results. So if that's the tool that works and allows us to get the job done, then it is what it is.
For sure. And the fact that it can do so much, especially like one of the things that I've seen work really well is if you're needing to bring genetics from an outdoor situation to an indoor situation is by doing some sort of 1-2 punch like what you're talking about, or doing like a cutting dipping where you're actually submerging the whole cutting into a sulfur solution with like a wettable sulfur or something. That seems to just work really well to also help prevent any pathogens from coming in and riding that genetic material into the indoor setting as well. Um,
Sulfur
so I,
dumps are a great SOP for sure. Typically, if I'm going to bring in any type of outside plant, whether it's outdoors or from another facility or grower, I like to do a 2-step quarantine process just to ensure that there's nothing infected in said plants. What I'll typically do is bring in those plants and quarantine them and get them to a phase where I can cut clones off of those plants. I then cut clones, throw the original plants away, grow those clones out, and if they are viable, then I will take cuts of those cuts, and that's what goes into production.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, especially when you're trying to have a tight biosecurity within a facility, or even in like someone's home grow. Bringing in something like a mold or a pest can be devastating for a home grower. And I know a lot of home growers even are using a lot of BioSafe products as well. Um, So, we kind of touched on some of uh, the pathway that you took in the cannabis industry. And I think you ended on I forget the name of it, but it was the one with the clay,
The
uh,
American Clay Works, yes, sir.
American Clay Works. That's right. Awesome. So, when you were working with American Clay Works, how was their relationship handled when it came to cannabis growers? I know a lot of larger agricultural suppliers were somewhat hesitant in dealing with cannabis growers early on, and those relationships were very, uh, they were on rocky ground, so to speak.
It was definitely interesting in the early days. We called them green tomatoes. We knew exactly what the grower was talking about, but there was kind of an understanding like when you used to go into a head shop and you would call it a water pipe instead of a bong. It was just semantics that we had to play. We knew who our customers were, but we just didn't want to implicate anybody or, cause anybody to get in any undue trouble. But the owners of American Clay quickly saw that, cannabis is a legitimate crop type and that it's no different than selling soil or nutrients to somebody growing lettuce. We're just, helping them facilitate their business. And I was very lucky in helping them kind of break that stigma. They wholeheartedly embraced the cannabis industry while I was there. And so they went complete 180. It went from green tomatoes to we know who our customers are and we want to support them however we can.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I feel like it's so important too because, like, sure, you can, go in and talk about tomatoes at your local hydro store, but like tomatoes, they are a fairly hungry crop. Like, they require a fairly nutrient dense package when being fed. But cannabis is sometimes just this whole other beast where you can, depending on where you're growing it, because not a lot of people are growing tomatoes under LEDs in a controlled environment, agriculture sort of way. Some are, but not as many. But with cannabis, you get just, such a different, the plant has such different needs when you bring it inside as opposed to row cropping it in a field per se. Um, when uh, the American Clay Works,
Yes, sir.
when they transitioned over to sort of embracing the cannabis industry and being open about the fact that they were working with these growers, what were some of the challenges that they faced um, that you weren't seeing necessarily in other industries that you were already serving?
Uh, the pesticide regulation being the biggest one. In the early days, there were no regulations, and then they came out with a banned list, and then they came out with an approved list. So it was really hard to kind of keep up with what was okay to spray for a while. And that list is still actively being added to or taken away from. It really kind of limited growers' abilities to mitigate certain issues that they could face. And rather than using certain chemicals in an ethical way, and possibly allotting enough time for that chemical to no longer show up on testing. It's just been completely banned from the industry. And I know that's been a pain point for some folks. There is an ethical way to do everything, but sometimes the ethical way is a little bit more expensive. And, when we're talking about some of these operators that are smaller mom and pop style operations, some of the challenges that they face can be insurmountable just because of the cost. And so I would say that was probably the biggest hurdle for the industry at first. A lot of people have adapted, pivoted, and been able to find success with the new regulations. But I would say that that's probably the biggest thing that cannabis faced that other growers did not face. Like if you were a lettuce grower and you're selling it at the farmers market, you're not being subjected to the same scrutiny as the gentleman that's selling cannabis out of a dispensary, which to me is kind of ridiculous because you have to be 21. We all know that smoking something is probably inherently dangerous anyway. Like just the standards that have been imposed on the industry, it's almost to the point of being ridiculous because they don't subject food to these same standards. Like the organic food at Whole Foods has more microbial content on it than the cannabis that you can buy at a store, supposedly.
Sure, sure. I mean, and how many wine growers are just spraying oodles of sulfur all over their crop, and it still even passes as like biodynamic certified.
Right.
So,
Just
there's a
because it says
hypocrisy
organic
there
on
for
the
sure.
bottle, that's one thing that I feel like is a misnomer amongst a lot of consumers. You know, they see organic, so they automatically think that it's safe. Organic is generally safer, but arsenic is organic, Nick. So there's, exceptions to every rule, so to speak.
Right, exactly. Like organic only really means attached to a carbon molecule, right?
Correct.
So, I mean, yeah, like to think organic means pesticide free, that's one of the things that I see people running into a lot where it's not that way and it's never been that way. And I do know that a lot of sort of organic based produce when there's like a media standpoint when it's publicized, it usually is publicized as being this safer alternative, this less toxic alternative to conventionally grown crops. But there's so many that's wrong in so many reasons. But also, it could be said maybe correct in other reasons, like maybe the nutrient density of something that's grown with organic amendments is higher than something grown with synthetic salt fertilizers. And, but
It's
also,
hard to just make those blanket statements, man.
it is because it also depends. Like, is the guy growing tomatoes feeding his, greenhouse, hothouse tomatoes with like 1.5 EC nutrient solution or 3.0 EC nutrient solution? That the nutrient density of those two products are going to be different. They might look the same and smell the same, but it's going to be different. And so it is, yeah, it's hard to make those blanket statements, but you're absolutely right that like organics does not mean that it's better or safer or anything like that, which we have been so led to believe. Um, and I'm really glad that you bring that up too, because I do feel as though there's like the practice of organic growing and then the religion of organic growing. And in so many ways, sometimes it's hard to differentiate the two when you're deep into it. Um,
In my heart of hearts, science has its place. Mother Nature definitely knows what she's doing, but I found that the Synganic approach, where you use organic amendments, but you can supplement with chelated minerals if needed, really allow a plant to reach its full potential because you can give it what it needs when it needs it. It's awesome to use organic inputs, but you have no control over when those inputs become available. And so, in a scenario where you may need to, boost the plant's nitrogen levels a little bit, doing a foliar spray with some, nitrogen and potassium would probably be to your advantage at that point. And you probably don't want to use urea because that's going to make you fail a, microbial test at that point. So chelated
yeah,
nitrogen makes sense. That Synganic approach is just really helping nature do its job, is how I like to look at it.
for sure. Well, since you touched on the Synganic approach and how you really find that to be sort of the best method to achieve the fullest potential of the plant, what were some of your really successful harvests as a grower that you look back on, and like what do you feel made it as successful as it was?
I think probably my best harvests that I've ever done have been, that Synganic style of growing. I like cocoa as a media when I'm growing synganically because cocoa is very similar to a hydroponic media in terms of being able to irrigate frequently, but it has enough surface area and carbon content to be an awesome host for microbial activity as well. And so I feel like you can get those terpenes and enzymatic production that occurs in soil in cocoa, while at the same time being able to feed the plants as needed and really push, the harvests. And, it's going to sound kind of silly. I know a lot of folks have used a lot of different nutrient lines, but are you familiar with Dynagrow? Do you remember Dynagrow? They were the one part that came in the white bottle. Uh,
Yeah, I think I do remember that. I think I remember feeding houseplants Dynagrow.
So I used to use Dynagrow for my veg formula, and then I would use it for my base bloom. Obviously, I would throw in some supplementals in there as well. But again, going back to John and Santa Cruz, keeping it simple, plants don't know what the bottle says, and they don't know what the graphics are. They need
Yeah,
zinc 4, P2O5, and K2O. And I don't want to, sound nutrients are very similar. They're kind of like cigarettes. It's what brand appeals to you because they're all basically the same stuff.
yeah.
The
Oh,
additives can definitely make a difference, but when we're talking base nutrition, man, it's the same elements that feed the plants. And to touch on that organics thing again, Even if you feed organically and use all organic inputs, only inorganic ions can penetrate your Casparian strip. So even if it's an organic input, it has to be broken down into an inorganic molecule for the plant to actually utilize it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, um, like the only thing that really differentiates salt nutrients for me as a commercial grower is their solubility rate. And for that, and if there's any impurities in there. But other than that, yeah, calcium nitrate is calcium nitrate. Mono potassium phosphate is monopotassium phosphate. Plants uptake phosphates and nitrates, and um, all these sulfates, all these different things that you can add to either like to an aqueous solution, or you can amend in or spray on an organic crop if you're running low in like a sap analysis or something like that. Like it is silly to think that you have to be one or the other to achieve the best results, where I do really like the idea of, creating this large buffet early on with a heavily amended organic substrate, and then adding to it as the plant needs it, rather than, because sometimes I feel like the approach for a living soil can start to seem cost prohibitive and daunting for newer growers when they realize, oh, you can do saturated paste tests, and you can do leaf tissue analysis, and you can do all these things, and then what, I'm supposed to look up targets online and calculate how much bone meal I need to add to get phosphorus and calcium into the soil at these specific ratios. That's so much math. Whereas you can go, hey, this bottle has a little bit of everything that the plant needs, and it looks like it's just not getting enough, so I'm just going to add a little bit of this to the system. That it's easy, and it makes it not so much it removes the complications that I feel like some people can run into if they really try to dive heavy into a fully organic um, substrate and growing method.
My methodology is very similar mentality in terms of you're just kind of plugging any deficiency holes that may occur. By having that organic base there, they're going to eat what they need when they need it. And then if you supplement, it's like, hey, you just needed a little bit extra of this because you're, in a certain phase. Like obviously when we're stretching a lot, calcium is key. So, those first couple weeks of flower, whatever you have in your media may not be enough. So doing a few foliar sprays with like a calcium chloride or, like a lingosulfonate, something like that can definitely aid in that calcium uptake and make sure that everything else is firing the way that it's supposed to. Because
For sure.
as you know, like calcium's an immobile nutrient, it relies on transpiration. And while living soil is awesome, it's also a triple 20 in terms of feed. We're assuming that all the plants need the exact same thing at that point. And if you're growing a Noah's Ark of genetics, like growers like to do, you're never going to see the full potential from any of those plants. You can find a happy medium where they all do okay. But if you're growing something that has genetics that are, originating from Afghanistan or Nepal next to something that originated in Colombia, they're like, hey, man, we don't know we're growing inside and we don't know what this nutrient profile is trying to do for us. You can find that happy medium, but neither of those is ever going to be like we're home.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think like what's that stuff that they sell on the infomercials, the flex tape or whatever that they slap on the side of a barrel to plug a hole. It's almost like the flex tape for the Liebig's Law barrel, where you can plug those staves up so that you can raise the level of opportunity for the grow itself, rather than being like, oh no, I don't have enough available calcium. I'm gonna put this oyster flower in there, and I'll see what happens in 3 or 4 weeks. Um, I mean, in a plant cycle like cannabis, that's half of the flowering cycle, or it may be too late to actually remedy those issues that you're facing. And there are even chelated organic forms of calcium that you can use, but it's about like the availability, kind of like you're talking about, and making sure that you get it there right when it's needed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so when you were working for the American Clay Works, when did you sort of decide that you were going to transition out of there? And did you transition from there directly to BioSafe,
I
or?
did.
Yeah.
I started doing the social media for American Clay Works and was just taking pictures of all the grows I was consulting with, pictures of new products, just trying to create an online presence for the business. And the current vice president, he used to be the sales manager when he hired me, Jeff Klein. He hit me up on Instagram and said, "Hey, I'm going to be in Denver for a couple of days. If you want to go see anybody, I'd love to go do some visits with you." And in my mind, I'm like, BioSafe wants to give me a job. So I called some of the larger growers that I was working with at the time and said, like, "Hey, got a favor to ask." And by the second grow that we had gone and seen, we weren't even talking business at that point. We were quoting the Big Lebowski and laughing. So I knew it was a really good fit. And
Nice.
by the end of the ride along, I not a shy guy, so I just asked him. I said, "Hey Jeff, are you feeling me out for a job?" And he said, "Hey, do you want a job?" And I flew out to Hartford, which is where HQ is located, and met with Jeff and our old president, Rob LaRose. May he rest in peace. And they gave me an opportunity. I know they were probably a little skeptical at first, just like American Clay Works was, in terms of, are we bringing this kid on to tackle an industry that may not be here in a couple of years? But I'm very fortunate to have done the work that I did at BioSafe. Like you said, if you don't have zerotol in the garden, we need to have a conversation. Making the brand an industry standard was a mission of mine, and I told him from the day that I was hired that ultimately I wanted to end up being the national cannabis specialist. And a couple of years ago, I was rewarded with that position. So now I get to, basically travel coast to coast and make sure that if anybody has any questions about our gear, we're getting them resolved and making sure they're coming out on the back end making some money.
That's awesome. And it now sounds like you have almost like a whole division that helps handle the cannabis industry because it is growing and you do see BioSafe pretty much in every grow.
It's pretty cool. I've got some marketing people that help me out with a lot of stuff, and I don't want to say that I can tell other reps what to do, but if there's cannabis stuff that needs to be done in other territories, I can definitely help coordinate actions with MSOs or other grows, and then the reps in that territory if there's a water test that needs to be done or like a site visit, and then if it's something they can't handle, I put it on the books and I fly to wherever it is and make sure that we get to the bottom of whatever it is that's occurring. It's sometimes it's not IPM. It's the worst thing about the facet of IPM in cannabis growth is that we are the last to get credit and the first to get blamed. Anything
Yeah.
happens in the garden, it's always our fault. Oh, it's the spray guys, and you can clean up a garden, and then people are just like, oh, it's business as usual. They don't
Yep.
realize the amount of work and strategy that goes into an effective IPM program. And I know for a lot of folks, um, it can be kind of prohibitive because of some of the label language that's out there. Not a lot of products were designed to be sprayed in an indoor facility. And so, I used to run into this all the time at BioSafe. I would get calls and they would say, "Okay, break down, acres into tables for me. I don't have 4 acres. I've got 38 4x8 tables and I don't know how to do the math." And
Yep.
so,
I ran into them like, how much do I spray in a 4x4 tent? This how many 4x4 tents fit in an acre?
we've basically tried to make sure that all the literature out there now is a little bit easier to digest and that folks understand how to use the tools a little bit better, and so that that user error goes down. But I always excuse my French here, but I always like to say we've got more shit than shovel in this industry, and a lot of times spraying is the last thing to get done, and sometimes it gets hurried through, but really it is one of the most important aspects of the grow. Cleanliness is important in this industry more than ever because people are now being tested for yeast, mold, microbials. And if you're growing in a dirty environment, it doesn't matter what your THC content is if you can't sell your product.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that it was on a BioSafe product that I first saw um, an application rate represented as a ratio or as a percentage rather than a pounds per acre, where that still doesn't even tell you, am I spreading that through 50,000 gallons, 100,000 gallons? Like what's that dilution rate to achieve the actual effective application? And so seeing that in BioSafe products really helps, especially for home growers. Like you mix up 1 liter bottle, you put one milliliter in if it's a 1 to 1,000 ratio. It's very easy things like that it helped a lot of the smaller guys out.
We that ratio really came from the water treatment aspect of what BioSafe does. We've got a lot of different divisions at the company. We've got a pre and post harvest ag. We've got horticulture, which is the umbrella that cannabis falls under. We've got a lake pond and municipal division that basically treats water and wastewater. So we have our fingers in a lot of different industries in terms of just fighting pathogens, and I feel like that's why we've been so successful in this space, because we didn't take a product and market it to cannabis people specifically. We had a product that fit really well into the industry in terms of just ethics and sustainability. And, our end goals are very similar in terms of being able to have a system that will, allow us to be profitable without harming the planet and, making a positive impact on everything that we do. When we're spraying zerotol, we're not having a harmful residual that, could possibly get into groundwater and kill fish. It's not going to affect bees. There are a lot of aspects to the stuff that we do that allow us to stay on that safer end of things. And I know kind of how we were talking about organics earlier, not necessarily notating safe, but organics typically are softer style chemistries, and the majority of our portfolio is OMRI certified because we do believe in organic approaches whenever possible. There are some conventional chemistries in there as well, but more often than not, if we can do it organically, that's what we want to do.
For sure. Yeah, no, I think that that's sort of a great mentality to have going into it is, like there are limitations to a lot of the approaches that gardeners and growers alike can take, as well as producers of the chemicals and the different inputs that people are using in their gardens. There's limitations, and so doing it to the best of our abilities within those limitations is super important. And I do find that the products from BioSafe are very much geared towards that. You just reminded me, I believe that I've even dealt with BioSafe before I was even in the cannabis industry, because we would use the wax stripper for apples, where you put it into a washing basin and you can wash the apples, and it'll remove any of that waxy coating that's sprayed onto apples as a preservative. Um,
I think
and so,
Sanidate 12 is the one that's for apple baths. Pretty sure that's the chemistry.
there you go. Yeah, that's super fascinating. Um, so when within your own gardens, what were some of the successes and setbacks that you had some of the greatest learning experiences from?
Um, I would say some of my greatest successes have been just, kind of the random genetic hunting stuff. It's always that weird seed that comes in a paper towel or a cigarette cellophane that you're like, yeah, I don't know if I'll ever grow this, but they always end up being the best plants for whatever reason. I had a Gelato 41 that my buddy Mike gave me from a bag seed, and it was one of the most vigorous plants I've ever grown. I would say probably my biggest failure was pretty early on. I brought my harvest from outside into my veg room because that's where I had my net hanging, not thinking that, hey, these plants were outside and probably had bugs on them. And, within 2 weeks, I noticed that I had thrips and spider mites. And so I learned very quickly that if a plant goes outside, it stays outside unless it's
Yeah,
been treated very heavily. But, just the trials and tribulations that kind of everybody goes through. I've had reservoirs flood, I've had ACs fail, I've had, issues where one time in Santa Cruz, we had a letter from the property manager that said that the electric bill had never been this high in the history of the unit, and they went back 15 years in electric bills, and there would be an electrician at my house on Wednesday to investigate. And
holy
so we get the
shit.
letter on Monday. We had to clean out the garage and get everything ready. Wednesday, when the electrician showed up, he saw a bunch of space heaters. I talked to everybody in Santa Cruz that I knew, and I was like, if you have a space heater, I need to borrow it. And he kind of looked at me like, it's not that cold here, dude. But he didn't say anything. And because Santa Cruz was a pretty cool place in terms of just the culture, he told the landlord, he's like, they have some space heaters plugged in. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but he knew what was going on.
For
But by
sure.
Friday, we had everything set back up and was ready to go.
Nice. Did they camp out in a U-Haul for the week?
They were at a buddy's house. They went up to Los Gatos for a little bit.
Oh, for sure. That's still quite the drive actually to get them out of Santa Cruz to Los Gatos. You know, you're driving along that windy ass road down from Santa Cruz.
Highway 9.
Yep. Oh man, I've been on that a bunch of times whenever I would go up to like the boardwalk or whatever growing up. Um,
Actually, the house was like right off of Second and Main. We used to sit in the driveway and we could hear the concerts and stuff they would do in the summer.
damn,
Could
that's
walk to
pretty
Steamers
dope.
Lane. It was pretty cool, man.
Yeah. Um, well, within your gardening career, are you still gardening, or does work kind of draw you away from a home base too often to make that viable?
I've got a really nice veggie garden, and I like to do a couple plants outdoors in the summertime for rosin. That typically keeps me set through the year. I kind of gave up flower at the beginning of this year just for health reasons. I was coughing a lot, and so I decided to see if I could go through January without smoking, and I did. And then February came to an end, and I was like, I think I like rosin better.
For
You know,
sure.
Puffco and Carta have changed the game, man. It's now that I don't have to use a torch to enjoy my rosin, I'm all about it.
Yeah, I do love my Puffco. It's like the simplest dab rig I've ever owned. But I also love my Volcano because I don't know, there's just something about vaped flower that just it gets you there.
The flower,
Um,
it has the flavor, man. That's for sure.
it does. And also I never got good at making my own rosins and stuff, and so I can't really afford it. Those things are some of the companies now when they're like actually are making a good product and they know it, they just start to charge out the ass.
Yeah, there are folks here in Denver that are getting $60 a gram for their cold
Yeah,
sticks.
similar out here in Oregon. Yeah, $60 a gram. Some places too, they're up to like 100 to 120 a gram for like uh you know, live rosin. And I'm just like, ah, come on guys, it's not worth that much.
I'm pretty lucky. I know a couple people that are very good at making hash, and so we just do a split at the end of the summer.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, well, so with all of your experience growing, do you have any sort of like hidden weapons or anything techniques that were really unique to your style of growing that either you could always count on in your own grow or that you could go and implement in someone else's grow that was having an issue that was just like the the fix for that thing no matter where you saw it?
There have been a couple of tricks I've picked up along the way that have really helped, me be able to solve issues kind of unconventionally. One of my favorite tricks is the popsicle sticks and botrytis. Botrytis is an anaerobic microbe, which means that it needs a stagnant environment to thrive. In grows that have possible, humidity issues, what I've seen work very, very well is to go in and do an initial spray with something like a zerotol 2.0 to basically kind of knock down the inoculum as much as possible. And then you remember those tongue style popsicle sticks? They sell them at like Hobby Lobby.
Yeah.
What I'll have growers do is literally break them at a 45-degree angle, pull the cola away from the stem, and stick that popsicle stick in there just to hold the bud open. And at that point, because we've changed the environment, that botrytis isn't going to be able to grow further because it's constantly being desiccated by the airflow that's actually able to get into there at that point. And so it's a non-mechanical way, like you're not spraying anything after that point. You're not, doing really any other maintenance. You're just allowing oxygen to do its job and hamper that pathogen's growth. Um, some of the other techniques that I've used in the past. If you have fungus gnats and you're in a soil garden, this is awesome for home growers. Cigarette sand, like a fine layer of cigarette sand on the tops of your pots. It's great for fungus gnats. It's permeable enough to allow water through, but it's thick enough that once it gets wet, the fungus gnats can't crawl back through it. So you're going to cut
Hell
down
yeah.
your numbers exponentially. Um, Back in the day when we used to use easy cloners, we would take like the Canada Dry, like the little tonic bottles, the glass ones, and we'd freeze them. And then you could actually throw that in your aeroclone reservoir, and it would offset some of the heat from the pump and not change your EC or pH value. So it was a way to kind of keep your cloner cooler for a longer period.
Nice.
One thing that I used to do, really don't do it anymore because most of the stuff is outside. But right before you harvest, if you do an extended dark cycle, it really does kind of allow the plant, like it's squeezing the last of the juice out, so to speak. Again, these plants don't know they're growing inside, and so if they have a prolonged dark cycle, they're going to throw every available resource into trying to catch that grain of pollen to be around for that next, generation, next year type of thing. And so I really feel like that can help increase terpene and oil production in certain strains. But there is a very fine line. I've seen it where, 48 hours is awesome. 72 hours, you start to get botrytis because they've sat in the dark for too long.
Yeah.
And so, it is a strain specific approach, but there are, just some little tricks and stuff that I've learned along the way to kind of make stuff work a little bit better. I'm sure everybody knows about, getting your plants a little colder at the end if you want to enhance that anthocyanin production and have stuff perp out a little bit. And because I know everybody in the stores today wants purple weed, so
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, those are some great tips. I feel like the I've definitely tried the dark cycle at the end, and it does seem to do something. I know that like with the plant's circadian rhythm, they typically build up enough sugar reserve for that upcoming scoto period or nighttime period, and so I've heard from some people that say, like it is, like you said, a really fine line. Like if you go too far past a certain point, then the plant does run out of like backup energy, and so it can no longer reinforce the cell walls, and so it does become susceptible to um, mold or mildew incursion. And but there is like there's something about the terpene profile on something that sits in the dark for a little bit that is different. And I have found like I think with like berries are more like nuanced flavor terpene profiles. It seems to help bring them out and make them a little bit more robust and pronounced. Um, were there any other things that you felt like really spoke to like or that your style kind of aided in creating your final product? Like was there just something that you were like, I can't live without this?
I'm a real big fan of microbes. The stuff that microbes can do and aminos really allow growers to push the envelope without having to worry about contamination. There are certain aminograms that you can put on plants that will mimic like PGRs or hormones. And the really cool thing is when aminos are broken down, there isn't a residual. And so, for example, there was a product I used to use from a company called Chematech that was out of Spain, and they made a product that was a fulvic acid, amino, and oligosaccharide syrup. And basically, the aminogram was geared towards fruit and flower development. And so, when you fed that fulvic acid, you were making sure that the nutrients were uptaken to the best of their abilities. Oligosaccharides are very short chain sugars. It's like glucose, sucrose. There's two more that escape me right now, but they're actually plant available sugars. And so, you can increase plant bricks directly. And if your plant's sugar content goes up, then it can focus on other things like terpene and oil production. And, just having that aminogram with the cytosine, the arginine, everything geared towards that fruit and flower development, it just gave me some of the most fragrant, terpene-rich flowers that I've ever grown. It's still an available product. I need to get some more. I don't have any right now, but that's definitely something that if I was going to be starting up a new grow, that would be one of the products I would say, that needs to be on the shelf.
For sure. Yeah, I love the it's a company out of Oregon. Um they make the product Full Power. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's I forget
Bioag.
BioAg, yeah, but they also have all of their different like amino acid based mineral additives as well. And I've used their like multi-amino or their calmino, mix that into fulvic acid and just use that as sort of like a drench for a hydroponics scenario. And it does seem to just make things robust, and like every all the terpenes start to pop a little bit more, and you get this real like happy smell in the garden. I do really like that. I'm glad you brought that up. It makes me think I need to probably start implementing that again, just for some of these more finicky terpene profiles that are desired nowadays.
I feel like for a while we kind of got off track in terms of terpene profiles. There was a lot of products on the market that had esters and would drive your plants to smell or taste a certain way. And in doing so, we really kind of muted what the plant could express naturally. Really, aminos, fulvic acid, excess magnesium, and sulfur are the elements that are responsible for oil production. If we look at any other oil producing crop, whether it's lavender, even citrus, when they have magnesium and sulfur in abundant amounts, oil production always goes up. Cannabis isn't any different in terms of those elements are going to help, push the nuances of that plant to its full potential without imparting anything artificial, so to speak. Like it's not going to make it smell like grapes or
For
berries.
sure. I mean, I think that's the same reason why, like Epsom salt was like the secret weapon in so many tomato farmers' gardens.
Mag
Just
sulfate.
giving an Epsom salt foliar, you're providing magnesium and sulfur, just like you're talking about, and you're making all of those flavonoids and terpenes pop. Because you walk into a fragrant tomato garden, that is almost more pungent than walking into a fragrant cannabis room. Like tomato it gets crazy smelly when you have a really healthy crop.
Sure.
Um, so that's a really good point. I didn't even think about that. Again, I probably need to be adding more Epsom salt foliars early on, um, just to help make sure that the plant's satisfied there. Um,
Dynagrow back in the day actually used to have a bloom additive called MagPro, and it was a high phosphorus, but the other two components were magnesium and sulfur. So
oh,
they knew
nice.
back in the day as well that that was really what could help push those plants to do their best in terms of whatever it is they were trying to express.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, you know, I feel like
That
we
being
as
said, Nick,
cannabis.
I'm
Sorry.
sorry, I was going to say, something that we need to always take into consideration though is genetic potential. There are there are limitations to every genetic, and a bad grower with good genetics can grow decent weed, but a great grower with crappy genetics is still just going to grow boof.
Yep.
It's that genetic limiting is something that I don't think is considered in some aspects of gardening. It's like if I took every supplement at GNC and went to the gym every day, I'm still not going to look like LeBron James, dude. It's not in the cards.
No.
And so, you got to know what your plant is capable of and try to get it to close to that point, but be realistic with your expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly with that. We always, I feel like as growers, experienced growers, I always hear say, like genetics are going to be your first most important thing. You can use there's a million different ways to grow this plant, and dozens and dozens of ways that work extremely successfully. But if you don't have the genetics off the start, then you're hindering yourself before you even press go. And so that's a really important part to it. And, your experience from seeing so many different grows through, um, the American Clay Works and through BioSafe. Uh, you've probably visited more farms than most people. Um, what are some of the things and trends that you're seeing within the grow space right now that let's do it in a two-part. So what are you seeing trending in the industry right now that is a positive that you're like really excited to see happening? And then what is something that you're seeing happen that may be something that is still happening that should have changed a long time ago, or something that's happening or like starting to happen that you're like, we need to change these actions because I'm seeing this not help, uh whatever aspect of help that may be.
One positive thing that I've seen in a lot of the gardens is basically growers' adaptability. Um, Being in such a narrow lane with a limited wheelhouse of tools, guys have really carved out a niche and been able to, kind of find their lane, so to speak. The issues that a lot of facilities were facing 3, 4 years ago have pretty much gone to the wayside, and guys have really, figured out how to steer the boat, so to speak. But there is a 100-pound gorilla, 1,000-pound gorilla, whatever you want to call it, in the corner of the room that I feel a lot of facilities aren't really addressing, and it's waterborne pathogens. It really is going to be the next root aphid, russet mite thing for the industry in terms of growers just trying to play catch up and fix it. Um, a lot of times there are multi-million dollar facilities that will just have an RO skid, but they're not doing anything in terms of sanitation other than reverse osmosis water. And when we look at, again, because BioSafe does a lot of water treatment, when we look at what municipalities are doing to treat for pathogens, they do not care about plant pathogens. They only want to kill things like E. coli, Listeria, Salmonella, coliform, stuff that can make you and I sick. But don't care about things like Pythium, Phytophthora, Xanthomonas, Fusarium, other waterborne pathogens that can, be devastating to a crop. Um, Without the ability to sanitize said pathogens, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I actually had a grower in Oklahoma City that tested his municipal water and he had Pythium in the water source. So,
Wow.
because there are so many growers in a small space, they're all doing drain to waste, they're all sharing the same contaminants in the long run. It doesn't matter if you've got a filter, you also need to put a sanitizer into the solution to make sure that you're doing everything you can to prevent, possible infection, because with these microbes, a lot of times if your plants get sick, there's nothing you can do. We can bring them back to a point where they're doing okay and almost get them into like remission, but they're still going to have cancer. That it's never going to be out of there, and the longer we keep that plant around, the less healthy it's going to be. And so, it's an investment in the future. By treating your water, you're saying I want to be around in, the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, because you're thinking long term.
What are your three favorite ways to treat source water for cannabis irrigation?
So the stock tanks, typically, like what I like to do is have some type of ozone or UV in said tank, and have a pump where you're basically recirculating from the bottom of the tank to the top, so that we are treating that entire column. If we just have a bulb in the bottom, you're only going to sterilize what's on the bottom part of the tank. So that movement is crucial. By utilizing UV or ozone, we're not changing the pH or EC of the solution, so it is a very good option for stock tanks. There are a few different options out there for treating water. Very common ones are things like chlorine dioxide or sodium hypochlorite. Um, Both of those work okay for human health pathogens, but the thing about hypochlorite chemistries is they don't touch zoospore, which is basically a dormant fungal spore. And if the idea is to be able to clean that column effectively for plants, that maybe isn't the best tool for you. I'm a big fan of peroxyacetic acid, PAA. It's like what's in zerotol. It handles organic burden the best in terms of decomposition, and it breaks down into oxygen and water and will touch zoospore. So when we're talking about residual, oxygen and water can be utilized by the plant, whereas hypochlorite is going to break down into unusable EC. And so there's going to be a part of your water column now that's monopolized that could be nutrient profile that is instead unavailable salt as a result of sterilization.
For
Um,
sure.
I
So you mentioned chlorine dioxide. Do you mind if I pick your brain a little bit more about that? And
Sure.
could you explain why you think that is less effective than peroxyacetic acid?
So chlorine dioxide is an awesome chemistry, but if we're talking about just treatment rates, you need to use more chlorine dioxide than you would PAA to be able to achieve similar ORP rates. And again, the fact that xylitol breaks down into oxygen and water, it's a byproduct thing at that point. It's a usable byproduct versus an inert. The chlorine dioxide is a very effective tool, though. I do, preach a lot of growers to utilize the air treatment that they manufacture. The chlorine dioxide clamshells are awesome for cure rooms and hallways, because they will basically address any inoculum that would find its way into your facility when you open a door. Most of the growers that I know that are failing for things like aspergillus, they don't fail for it in the grow, they fail for it in the cure room. And it's because the cure is a dark, stagnant environment that, somebody opens the door real quick, looks in, there's a temperature change because the hallway and the cure room are two different temperatures. So you can potentially create condensation at that point, and whatever inoculum is in the hallway now found its way into the cure. Those chlorine dioxide packets, they have ones that are slow release that you can actually hang in areas with plants and people, and just minimize that risk of inoculum spread by, basically treating your air. BioSafe does really good for treating your plants, your water, and your hard surfaces. The chlorine dioxide does a great job of just making sure that that air column is sterile as well.
For sure. No, I think that's a great differentiation. I've seen chlorine dioxide start to be used in like a suspended aqueous solution to treat lines and stuff. I do have a lot of experience though using like zerotol in treating our irrigation water and our irrigation lines. How would you say that compares to something like hypochlorous acid? Because for a while there, that was like the industry standard for a cleanser additive to your nutrient solution.
So hypochlorous is an effective way to treat water, but it's not the most effective. If we were to kind of put it on a scale, it would be like hypochlorous is here, chlorine dioxide is here, PAA is here, just in terms of overall efficacy. The problem with hypochlorous acid is resistance. Microbes can develop a resistance to it, and so you're using exponentially more. I know a lot of folks that they were utilizing hypochlorous acid, and in talking to the reps, they were being told to use exponentially higher rates to the point where they were going off label to try to remedy a situation. And I don't know why cannabis growers have that skateboarder mentality where they just need to go a little faster and then they'll make it type of thing. Like if I jump a little higher, it, you got to get to a point where you say, "Hey, man, we've used so much of this stuff and it's not working. Maybe it's time to switch it up."
Yeah,
If you are exponentially adding more of a product and not seeing results, what that tells you is that whatever it is you're fighting is resistant to what you're putting out. And so, the hypochlorous acid tolerance that the biofilm seems to basically kind of gain makes it a little bit less effective because, again, you're using so much of said product. And I've had some hash makers, this is just anecdotal evidence, but they've said that when they've used cleanse, they almost have like pool water terps in their rosin. And I think it has something
interesting.
to do with like the pseudo sterility that it creates in the root zone and the byproduct of that hypochlorite just being present. What else could it be? That flavor is somehow getting imparted into the terpene profile of that plant because it's present in the root zone.
For sure, that's a really great point to bring up because like I love using hypochlorous acid for like a surface disinfectant because you can make it for really cheap if you have an electrolysis machine and you're just
Mhm.
using something like potassium chloride or even sodium chloride. If it's going to touch the plants, I always just suggest using potassium chloride so that you aren't adding sodium to either like the root zone or otherwise in amounts that are non-beneficial for the plant. But yeah, that's really interesting to hear that it that they can almost build up an immunity to that, and especially with like the biofilms and like the mucus created by these different biologicals that we find in our lines, especially now that we're using so heavily things like 0.29 gallon per hour drippers and things like that, where you know the the actual emitter itself has ample opportunity to clog up if a biofilm forms on the inside of it. And as I'm sure that you've either seen or experienced, when you start to lose the emitter function across a large room of cannabis, that can be one of the biggest headaches because you're going around trying to play catch up. Oh, this plant needs a little bit of water. This one, no, its emitters are good, so don't water that one. Oh, water this one over here. None of its emitters have been working for 3 days and it's almost dead. Um,
You're essentially
so,
hand watering again at that point.
exactly.
It takes the irrigation system out of the equation. And, just like we calibrate our pH meters, our irrigation system is a scientific piece of equipment that needs to be taken care of and cleaned regularly.
For
And,
sure.
biofilm can grow in a matter of 72 hours. It's a very fast growing organism. And, in the case of something like cleanse, you're developing microbes, like you're probably killing the majority of what's in there. But what you're not killing is what's proliferating. And the more you utilize that product, the more you're taking out any other competition. So then that product is able to kind of go beast mode, or that pathogen rather is able to go beast mode because there's nothing else taking away from its resources at that point. If it's resistant to that cleaner but nothing else is, then it's the big one in the room at that point.
For sure. So let's say someone wants to apply zerotol to their irrigation system and they're using salt-based fertigation. Are there any limitations to the what you're using in your fertigation, whether it be like a pH range or an EC of the solution that zerotol would potentially have an issue with?
So the only two products we really don't want to see, direct inject mixed with xylitol would be orthosilicic acid. So a product like Faciliter or PowerSci or Vitalize, they can be used independently, but because orthosilicic acid is so bioavailable, when you mix it with an oxidizer, it actually activates in solution. And so we would be creating biofilm in the tank and clogging drippers down the line, which is counterproductive to what we are trying to do. And then obviously any type of microbials you would want to forego with a zerotol injection just because you're shooting yourself in the foot. If you mix a live active culture with a sanitizer, you degrade both products and you've made expensive water at that point. Um, really, with Xeritol, we want to make sure that it's never used with plain reverse osmosis water. Even in foliar sprays, we want to have a zero point 0.3 EC minimum. And the reason is Xeritol has a component in it called peroxyacetic acid, PAA. It's literally just vinegar and peroxide that have been stabilized in solution. It really just helps the H2O to be a stronger oxidizer for a longer period, but it's an acid. And so if we mix it into reverse osmosis water without any type of buffer, the pH plummets. And in order to bring that back up into a tolerable range, we're basically again creating very expensive water. If we mix a acid and a base without a buffer, they cancel each other out. So having that 0.3 EC minimum for any type of foliar spray really is recommended. I've had growers go up to like 3.2 EC in feeds with Xeritol and not have any issues.
For
I'm a
sure.
bigger proponent of direct injecting it rather than adding it to your stock tanks because then it's a replicatable amount of peroxyacetic acid and H2O2 that we're putting in the line. It's consistent. If we were to dose our tanks, if we don't use that within 24 hours, there's going to be little to no sanitizer left. And the problem is the subsequent feeds in the day are going to have less and less xeritol because as the product degrades, it breaks down into oxygen and water. And so, if you feed 18 hours into having that tank dosed, you will probably have a very small amount going through your emitters. By having it on the back end, you basically do all your fertilizer injection, do your xeritol, and then you would have your pH correction, and then you could fertigate with it. For most water treatment applications, we're talking a pretty low rate, about half a mil per gallon, which is a 1 to 5,000, up to about 1 to 3,000, which is like 1.2 mils per gallon. But for growers that are looking at water treatment, we ask that you reach out to either myself or the regional rep so that we can kind of talk you through it because it's not a one size fits all. If you're
For
on a
sure.
well, it's different than if you're on municipal, it's different than if you're on rainwater.
For sure. Just to make sure that I heard you correctly, did you say that you adjust the pH for a nutrient solution after you add zerotol or prior to?
After.
After, okay.
Yes, sir.
Because I've always noticed when using zerotol that if like, let's say it is in a tank that ends up sitting there for longer than 24 hours, that if the pH with the zerotol, let's say it starts at 5.5, by the next day it might be up to, 5.9, 6.0, depending on the overall size of the batch tank. Um,
That's
is
a
that
direct correlation to the peroxyacetic acid breaking down. The
for
acidic
sure?
component is gone, and so your pH is going to rise a little bit. If you're knowing that that's going to occur, what I typically recommend is go zero point 0.2 lower than you normally would to try to compensate for that swing. So, if it went in at 5.5, the next day it's at 6.0, try putting it at 5.3, and the next day you might be at 5.8.
For sure. No, that's a very good point. We've just started to pH prior to adding xeritol to the solution, knowing that by the time that it ends up getting to the tanks or to the plants, because we do use batch tanks in each room, that it's just going to be a higher pH than if we were to try and adjust it with the xeritol added. And so I just wanted to bring that up because I do think that it's an interesting point that does require a different approach depending on the situation that you find yourself in.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. So within everything that you have witnessed through your time in the industry, what are some of the pitfalls that you see either home growers or even new commercial growers facing?
Biggest pitfall that I have seen in this industry is lack of proper process implementation. I understand that, cannabis is very flavor of the month in terms of you always need to have the latest and greatest varieties, but there is a cost that comes within, taking in new plants, and a lot of times growers will rush the process because they don't want to be the last to market with said product. And, there's a very prolific disease in cannabis right now called hop latent viroid. I would say probably 95% of the facilities I've been to have it in some form, in some strain, because of the fact that they brought in some hype cut from somebody. And, the The lack of originality, I think, would be the other big pitfall. There's been a lot of uniformity in terms of grower methodology in the last couple of years. Everybody kind of wanted to use the same nutrition under the same lights and grow the same strains, and then they don't understand why, in a flooded market, their product isn't worth anything, and it's because they're bringing to the table what everybody else has. You know, 10 years ago, growers were very proud of their specific recipes and methodology, and I really hope we can get to a point where we're kind of getting back to that, because if we all do the exact same, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing expecting different results.
For sure. It's like make craft again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There, like we said, salts are just part of it, and there's a lot more that goes into it rather than I I don't want to like alienate anybody or make anybody feel bad, but what you see on Instagram isn't real life. And a lot of people just want to have that Instagram, photo for people. And it's like you're chasing it for the wrong reasons if that's why you're doing it.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, marketing is all just what people want to see. It kind of goes as far back as to the idea of history being written by the conquerors. It's never the full story. There's never the actual full holistic picture being shown. It's just what people want to show. And a lot of times there's a lot more failures that are behind that awesome cannabis picture that you see that you're jealous of or that you're envious of. And it's definitely not something to be envious or jealous of, because we learn from our failures. And how many times do we need to fail to get to something that you're proud of, to show and to share with other people? I feel like the social media kind of skews what that target should be, because I feel like a successfully clean grown crop should be something that you're proud to share, no matter how it looks. As long as it smells and it smokes good, I'm not really caring about some of the looks or the other aspects. Was it trimmed well? Is it super frosty? Yeah, who cares if the end product is good? I mean, the algorithm cares, unfortunately, but that is what it is. Kind of talking about this in the same line of thought of pitfalls for growers, where you see a little bit of change being maybe needed in the mindsets of growers. What would be some advice that you would want to give to yourself before you ever grew a plant?
Make sure that you read more than you think you should. Knowledge is power, and with the advent of YouTube and just the amount of data that's out there, you can learn a lot. There is a lot of good data that has come out of Israel. There's some good data that's come out of Canada. There's some good data that's come out of South Africa lately, because they're able to grow those crops federally and not have to worry about any type of oppression. So there's actual research being done. There are a couple of websites that I recommend every grower get on in terms of email blast. The first one is Horta Daily. The second one is MMJ Daily. And it's basically just what's going on in the world of horticulture and cannabis, so that you can stay abreast of acquisitions, new product development, new methodologies. I always try to tell people to embrace the concept of Kaizen, and that the plants have kind of taught us that all we need to do is grow a little bit every single day. And so, just to the younger me, take the plant's advice and, just try to be a little bit better than you were yesterday, and, learn something a little. Learning is, it's paramount, man, because if you feel like you've figured this all out, why are you still doing it?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like, yeah, if you don't have that hungry mind of wanting to continue to learn, then that's where I feel like you almost see it's like that almost comic trope of the old grower going, I've been doing this for 30 years, I can't learn anything from you. And you're just like, what do you mean that everything's changed in the past 5 years? How can you say you're doing the same thing from 30 years and that you still can't learn? Getting out of that mindset is extremely important. And for life in general, not just necessarily growing cannabis, but there's always new stuff to learn and always different ways to look at things. And, as new information is presented, you need to implement it into your thought process. Otherwise, if you're If you're just saying, no, I'm going to cherry pick, I'm going to take a little bit of this info and say, yeah, that's what I believe in, but I don't want to hear this other info because that just goes against what I'm already thinking. You're not going to be able to compete with those that are um, in taking all of that information and synthesizing a new way of looking at things that really is, it unfortunately is competitive in the market today, especially if you're looking at this from a commercial standpoint. You have to constantly be looking to improve and cut costs and always make and produce more pounds with less of higher quality. And it's hard. It's a really hard thing to do.
More with less. You hit the nail on the head, Nick.
Exactly. More with less. Absolutely. Um, well, man, this has been a wonderful conversation, and we just blew through all of my questions like nothing. But
Awesome.
I want to open this up a little bit and ask if there was anything else that's on your mind, cannabis related right now. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to make sure that you talked about?
Um, I just wanted to throw out there that I do have some available resources for growers. I'm only one man, so a lot of times it's very busy for me during the day. But last year, my co-author Ben Owens and I put out a book on Amazon called Clean Growing. That's basically a field guide for cannabis growers. Not necessarily a cover-to-cover read, but it's very informative and has chapters on botrytis, powdery mildew, root aphids, spider mites, thrips. It just kind of goes in depth into all the issues that we may face. I've had a lot of people tell me that it's been a lifesaver for them. And rather than producing a second book, Ben and I have actually started doing a monthly newsletter called Clean Growers that
Nice.
basically is just trying to stay current with what's going on in the industry. We just did an article on Bavaria bassiana, which is a really cool entomopathogenic fungus that has been utilized in cannabis for years in terms of soft-bodied insect control. But more research has shown that it is got a endophytic quality to it. Are you familiar with what an endophyte is, Nick?
Sure. It's like an endophyte would be something that enters into the plant, where an exophyte would be something that acts with on the outside of the plant.
Basically, it's a like an organism that can live within a plant that isn't necessarily parasitic.
Sure.
And so what we found is that there are certain strains of Bavaria bassiana that elicit these endophytic responses and can not only boost plant immunity, but help with biostimulation effects, help ward off disease and pest pressure, give higher Brix levels, higher biomass at the end. It's a very cool microbe, and I feel like again we're just kind of touching the surface of what it can do. And as more research is done, we're gonna be able to see that there are other endophytes that can really help cannabis beyond, just suppressing certain pathogens or bringing out certain desirable traits. Again, like with humans, isn't it something like 60% of our cells aren't human? Like
Yeah.
60%
Something
of
like
within
that.
us isn't even human. And so, when we have a healthy microbial relationship with the plant, again, Mother Nature is able to do her thing and we can really push that genetic potential.
For sure. I mean, that just makes me think of like the not so recent but heavily talked about differentiation between endophytic mycorrhizal fungi and ectophytic mycorrhizal fungi. I think I got those words right, but basically there's certain fungi that have this relationship with large trees, but they're ectophilic or exophilic, and
The the ectos only colonize carnivorous or deciduous trees.
yeah, and it like they that's like 70 or 80% of the biomass of these mycorrhizal fungi on the planet, whereas like the endophilic ones, they only it's only like 20%, but they affect a vast variety of plants. But so many of these plants that they do affect, there's like a contact time for return on this input investment that you're doing, and I'm glad that there's more research being done on similar things like Bavaria bassiana, which I use all the time in my garden for soft body insect control. And so, to think that it could be there in the plant tissue and stick around for a longer time potentially and have sort of this staying power within the substrate, that's pretty powerful.
We we're going to be putting something out here in the next couple of months that is going to change the game on how cannabis growers utilize Bavaria.
Awesome. I mean, I've been really enjoying things like Velifer because it's already in that aqueous solution. It's really easy to tank mix for a spray application, as well as what's that new one? Botanigard Max. That's really awesome too, especially if you're dealing with something like root aphids. Um,
What we found is that GHA strain somewhat endophytic. It has some staying power, but there are some strains that have none, and there are some strains that it's like that's their main job.
wow. I mean, that's great. I hopefully you've either already published an article on that or you will publish an article on that because that I feel like will help so many growers out.
That was actually the latest Clean Growers thing that went out today.
Boom, look at that. Well, I'm sure that we'll probably get this episode out in a week or two, so people will need to go back and check that out and read up a little bit more and find out a little bit more about what you're doing with this blog post that you're doing weekly. They can check out your book on Amazon as well. I think that that's great just to provide growers with another resource to help make sure that they are successful in their gardens. I mean, that's kind of what BioSafe is all about, right?
Yes,
Making
sir.
sure that gardeners are successful because it's one aspect of gardening that I feel like is so taboo is talking about integrated pest management, whether it be because what people are using they shouldn't be or because you know people don't want to think about pests. Pests are not the glamorous side of cannabis and they are not fun to deal with, and if you're dealing with them you don't want to show them off. So it's almost this catch 22. uh it, but I'm
Growers
really glad that there's people like you out here.
growers should not think that they've done something wrong if they have pests. It just means they've been growing long enough to encounter the hurdles that will arise.
Yep.
Growing is farming, and farming is hard work. The, you know, thing with cannabis is a lot of folks don't want to admit when something is going wrong, and so a lot of times if they have an infestation or an outbreak, they won't admit it until it gets to the point where it's like, dude, you should have said something 3 months ago. Now we can't do anything about this.
Yeah.
Um, Ego is something that I wish a lot of growers would get over. In any other aspect of farming, growers actually come together. They have co-ops and they talk about their seasons and what went right and what went wrong, and they share information. I really wish that there was something like that in terms of, like, I know the forums have touched on it from time to time. There's a lot of fake information on forums. There's some malicious people out there that will tell you just downright wrong stuff because they look at you as competition. I really wish there was a stronger sense of community within, the grower level to where, guys could get together and say like, hey, what did you do for your white flies last summer? I had XYZ and this is what I did. What did you do? And then they could compare notes and then, kind of amerate their knowledge like I'm able to, because I see so many growers. I can say, hey, this is what worked for 10 guys. This is what didn't work for 30 guys. So let's try it.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I mean, that's one of the main reasons why I started this podcast and why it's called The Way We Grow is because there are so many aspects of growing that require community effort, and a communal knowledge and access to all of that information. It's way more than one person can typically keep together on their own to have readily available for all the different permutations of issues that may arise within the garden. That's why you need your bug guy, you need your nutrient guy, you might even need an HVAC guy, and you name it. There's all these different areas of expertise that at one point you did have to be your own everything because of the legality of it, and you couldn't bring in a consultant or someone to help you to make sure that it was done to like an industry standard almost, whereas now you have access to all these different professionals within different fields that are all periphery to the cannabis industry that can all help aid in making sure that you achieve a profitable crop. I mean, in a commercial space, that's what you need. You need a profitable crop. And so, hats off to people like yourself for doing the work that you do and helping growers and coming from it with the history that you do. I mean, you can reference anecdotally all of your own experiences, as well as all of the different multitudes of experiences you've had helping all these other growers. And it really does help build the knowledge base for growers, everywhere.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, I think that this might be a great place for us to start to wrap up, because I really do feel as though you've kind of hit the nail on the head on a lot of these topics and driven home a lot of the importance for an IPM program. I didn't even think we were going to get into this to really talk about IPM applications, but it always comes up when people have that as part of their day-to-day life. So that's awesome. And I do just have a couple of wrap-up questions that I want to hit you with that I like to ask everyone that comes on the show. So as a former grower and as a user, I don't know if it's just past or current as well. What's your favorite strain of all time?
Grow or to smoke?
How about both?
This might sound a little cliche because not a lot of people like Blue Dream, but that was my favorite plant to grow. She had the bag appeal, she threw down, she was resistant to bugs and mold, and it came out of Santa Cruz when I was living there. So it was, I kind of got firsthand experience before it got all over the country with Blue Dream, and she was one of my favorite plants. I'd have to say my favorite to smoke though was the Black Widow that I had gotten from Harborside back in the day. It
Oh
was
yeah,
supposedly the original White Widow from Mr. Nice. She tested at 18% THC, but was 35% overall cannabinoid content. That smoke, I've never had anything like that for back pain or sleep. It was amazing.
nice. Yeah, I mean, I've just heard so many people say that fortunes were built off of the back of Blue Dream, and
Hmm.
it because it was just such a workhorse, and people were pulling down yields that they had never seen before at the time, and I don't blame them for wanting to just grow it. And I remember smoking it in the Bay Area, and it was exceptional. It was great weed, but it is one of those things now that you look back on it, and it almost has the same stigma as something like Tangy, where it was flooded. Everyone had it, and it was almost like I cannot take Blue Dream terps anymore. Like people like I can't take Jack terps anymore. I can't take orange terps anymore. Blue Dream was definitely, unfortunately, one of those. But even now, I see people being like, I got to get a cut of that Santa Cruz Blue Dream because that was like it was easy to grow. Like you said, it threw down. It hit all the boxes at the time. So it is funny that it gained that stigma. But man, you brought up Black Widow at Harborside, and I'm pretty sure that I had some Black Widow from Harborside at some point in the past. Um, so next question then. Who's your favorite breeder of all time? And sometimes I know that this can get a little difficult for growers because they don't like to pick favorites. So I like to add a little caveat now where it's if you had to clear let's say for you, if you're going into a company and you're consulting on them resetting an entire genetic library and they could only pick seeds, who or what breeder are you choosing to help populate that entire genetic library?
That's a tough one. There are a lot of really good breeders out there. I guess it would kind of depend on what their end goal was. If it was a hash company, probably recommend stuff from Bloom. They've got some really good washers. Anything with like a papaya in it would be advisable. If they're trying to go for flower, I've seen some really good stuff from Karma. I've seen some really good stuff from Ethos. I've seen some really good stuff from Clearwater. There are a multitude of people out there, and it's really hard to pick just one.
For sure.
If it's completely open ended and they had access to any seeds ever, I would say go to that old school Mr. Nice library that had the Neville's Haze, the Black Widow, the stuff that you just don't see anymore that had unique profiles. And I don't want to say it wasn't watered down, but a lot of the stuff that you get today, it's cookies on cookies on cookies, and the phenotypical expressions have kind of gone away, and everything looks similar. So if you're trying to differentiate yourself and grow unique flower, grow some stuff that nobody else has.
For sure. That's a great answer. It is a really hard question, and it's why I like to ask it because there's so many correct answers because it's all based on what you've experienced in a lot of ways and what you feel as though might be able to still hold viable currently. And old school genetics, there's something to them that even grown out now, seeing some people that are hitting their old NL5 haze crosses and starting to pull those back out. You're seeing some crazy flower morphologies, and the terpene profiles that are being described are not what you see on the market right now. And I feel like it's really important, and hopefully more of that gets out there for consumers to actually try. But we'll see. But yeah, love that answer. Um,
The one profile that's kind of gone the way of the dodo that I really wish would come back is real skunk weed. Like I've seen some stuff that people call roadkill skunk, and it's not the skunk that we had in like the early 2000s that literally smelled like a skunk.
yeah. Oh,
I
the
miss that.
the endless debate of roadkill skunk, and I feel like there's so many people that are searching for that one. Whoever finds it first of a true like roadkill skunk is going to make a lot of money. Well, last question then. What is your most memorable cannabis related experience?
Meeting my wife.
Tell me about it.
I was hanging out in Golden Gate Park, skateboarding with some friends, and had a little bit of extra weed that I needed to get rid of. And she was going to read her book, and she walked by me and smiled, and I thought, man, that girl is really cute. So I kind of watched her, and I saw her go up on the hill and read her book. And then when she left, I thought, I'm going to talk to this girl, just see what happens. And so she walked by again, she smiled again. So I was like, all right. I skateboarded after her, and I asked her, I was like, hey, honey, you need any nugs? And she's like, nah, I'm good. And I told me, she's like, do I look like I pay for weed? And I said, no, you're right. And I said, you want to smoke a joint with me? And she was like, no, no, I don't want to get high today. And I said, if you don't want to get a beer with me, I'll leave you alone. She goes, I love beer. And so I went to the liquor store and got two Colt 45s, and we've been together for 19 years. So,
Hell yeah. That's awesome. That's so funny. It reminds me of when I met my partner. We were going to culinary school, and um, I was coming up from the Bay Area, and so was she. And I I wanted to be Mr. Suave, and so I was like, I got the weed, don't worry about it. And I pull out like an eighth, right? And I'm like, I think I'm so cool with my eighth of nice weed. And she was like, "Oh, that's nice. But I'd rather
yeah.
smoke a couple blunts," and pulls out a jar of just a bunch of really like way better looking weed, and I was like, "Oh, I think I love you."
Awesome.
Yeah, but oh man, that was great. I really appreciate your time, and that was a wonderful conversation. Uh, some people are probably going to be like, "Oh, this was a commercial for BioSafe," but I really do think that the products that you guys are putting out, they may not be the only options on the market, but they definitely are effective, and I see them used everywhere, and I haven't had any issues with them through years of using them now. And so, it is what it is. I'm going to just stand behind it because I really do believe in the product that you guys are putting out there.
It's a solid backbone for a program, but you can ask any of the growers that I work with. I will recommend competitor chemistries to go along with what we're trying to do. Not everybody does everything extremely well. I always say don't hire an electrician to put in a toilet. It's a team effort here. And we have some products that can set up a really good base, but there are products from Certus, there are products from ProFarm, there are products from a bunch of different manufacturers that fit in well with what we're doing. And so I always tell growers, care about your paycheck as much as I do. And when I say that, I'm not talking about my paycheck, I'm talking about theirs. If we're going to, go down the rabbit hole and put together a program for them, the thing with organic applications or cannabis applications is you have to make sure you do all of them. If you only do the first step and the fourth step, you're not going to get the results that you need. Everything that we do is set up to have efficacy today, but it's also predicated on setting up our next spray to be that much more successful as well. And so just making sure that, guys have the knowledge to empower themselves to want to do it, not just saying, hey, go spray this, but telling them why they're spraying it, and like empowering them and educating them really allows us to have a, group of folks that cares about the end product and, is going to allow us to go from Florida to Oregon, so to speak, and get quality if we need it.
For sure. No, I couldn't agree more. Well, Zach, this has been great. Do you have any shout outs or plugs that you want to throw in here at the end?
Yeah. A shout out to the Gardening Unlimited crew. Shout out to American Clayworks. Shout out to everybody at BioSafe. Shout out to our boy Jared Ricci for putting us in touch and allowing us to put this together today. And shout out to everybody who cares about the plant and wants to make the world a little bit better place for themselves and others by sharing it.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to talking with you again.
This was a great experience, Nick. Thank you for the opportunity, brother.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. Have a good one.
You too.